Hey everybody, this is Sam with Wrestling Overtime, and this is your news and updates for March 29th. Now, I am going to start off with a lot of different news and updates and thoughts and opinions from me. And then about halfway through, I am going to go over some WrestleMania updates. They have had to make some changes, and I'm also going to talk about the matches and do some predictions. If you do not want any spoilers whatsoever, you don't want to know any news from WrestleMania, you don't want to know any changes, any athletes that may or may not have been added or dropped from the card, anything like that, on maybe who is going to be on Saturday night or who's going to be on Sunday night. If you do not want to know any of that, then just listen to the first half. When I get ready to start discussing that, I will tell you that the spoilers are coming, and you can shut off the podcast right then and there and not have any spoilers whatsoever. I don't want to even take a chance, even though I am not going to tell any outcomes of any matches or anything like that. I don't want to ruin WrestleMania for anyone whatsoever, but I know that there are some people out there in our wrestling community that are trying their best to stay off Twitter, Facebook, and not even find out if there's been any changes made or anything like that. And so I don't want, if you're one of those, I don't want to ruin that for you. So I will tell you when that's coming. If you guys have any questions, comments, problems, or protests at any time with this show, or, with Wrestling Overtime at all, feel free to write me at wrestlingovertime@gmail.com or hit me up on Wrestling Overtime's Facebook page or Twitter. You can tweet me or messenger me at any time, and I will get back to you as soon as possible and tell you whatever I know, and we can talk about it. Like I said, have been putting up wrestling articles and different live broadcasts that have been happening on Wrestling Overtime's Facebook page, and if I can get it to link or whatever, I'm putting it up on the Twitter page. Some of you know that when someone goes on Facebook Live, sometimes you can't get it on Twitter, and sometimes when people go on Periscope on Twitter, you can't get it on Facebook. So that's why you probably need to kind of just scroll through both of them, because Chris Jericho, we're going to talk about it. He did a Facebook Live tonight that was absolutely hilarious. And of course, I couldn't get it to pull over to Twitter to see it. And if you want to see it, it is on Wrestling Overtime's Facebook page. You have to scroll down a little bit because I've added some stories since then. And of course, this podcast will be going up on that page. So you'll have to scroll down some to get a hold of him. But it is on there, I promise. And you can see him. And it is absolutely hilarious. You can leave any reviews for this podcast episode or this podcast in general at podchaser.com. I know a lot of you listen on Apple Podcast and leave reviews or leave 5 stars over there. That's great and all. I love it. But not all of us use Apple. So if your podcatcher that you're on, like I use Pocket Cast, they do not allow you to rate anybody or leave any reviews. So I leave reviews for the shows that I like over at Podchaser, where everybody can see them and get them. They also make recommendations and everything like that for you if you want to check that out. So I just kind of want to start off news and updates tonight. I almost did a news and updates on Tuesday night on Dark Side of the Ring, and almost did kind of like a review on Dark Side of the Ring on the Chris Benoit story. I'm not sure if a lot of you guys would be interested in that. If you are, like I said, tweet me or messenger me on Facebook or write me at wrestlingovertime@gmail.com. I don't care to do any kind of reviews. I know a lot of people don't have Viceland. A lot of people are trying to put it up on YouTube, so you should be able to find it over there if you're wanting to watch it. But if you want me to review it, then I don't care to do that whatsoever. But a lot of you have been asking, hey, what did you think of the show? What do you think about Chris Benoit? Well, first of all, let me talk a little bit about the show. Dark Side of the Ring, I absolutely love the first season. The first season had stories that I was interested in as far as I was a kid, and the characters were kind of bigger than life. And then as I grew up and went to college and kind of got into my life, I dropped wrestling for a little while. And here, I don't know, in the last 2 or 3 years, I've picked it up. Really gotten into it in the last year. And so Dark Side of the Ring let me catch up with some people that I may have seen in my childhood or heard of in my childhood. One of those was Randy Savage and Miss Elizabeth. On the first season, it told their story. Now, I remember the Macho Man. I remember Miss Elizabeth. I wasn't really into the Macho Man. He was a little over the top for me. However, I did watch him. He usually was battling somebody that I liked, and I wanted to kind of root against him. I was also kind of intrigued about the relationship he had with Miss Elizabeth. I do vaguely remember them getting married and things like that, but did not know the whole story. So the Dark Side of the Ring, the first season, let me see the rest of the story. I remember being really, really young and hearing about the Von Erichs, but didn't really follow them. I picked up Pro Wrestling Illustrated and some of the Torch. I picked up some of those magazines at the grocery store when I would go with my mom when I was little, and I would read the articles and look at the pictures and stuff like that. So I kind of knew about the Von Erichs, but they really weren't on my TV growing up. So I never really knew what happened to him. I remember vaguely, I think Kerry Von Erich, I was still getting some of the magazines, I think, when he passed away. But as far as the other brothers, and knowing that Kevin was the only one left, I had no clue. Had no clue that he had basically isolated in Hawaii. Had no clue because I don't follow MLW at that time. I didn't even know that he had sons that were wrestling or anything like that. So that episode was really intriguing to me to kind of vaguely have a sense of some stuff, but I have no idea about the Cotton Bowl and them, filling it up and all the fans and how they were ready to make it big, and it just kind of all fell apart, and a lot of people believe there's a curse and stuff like that. Had no clue. Bruiser Brody, which was the very first episode of the series, is what intrigued me the most and really said, oh my gosh, I gotta watch this season. I had never heard of Bruiser Brody. He was before my time, as far as I know, because I don't remember him at all. I know since that, he was in New Japan, he was in a lot of promotions in the U.S., I'm sure my granny knows who he was and everything like that, and back in the day probably would have been more than happy to tell me all about him. He seemed like a character that she would not have liked, so she probably would have told me all about him. but had no clue that he had been murdered, had no clue that he had been murdered in a wrestling locker room, or that they didn't really solve it, and no one really spent time on it. So, yeah, it was episodes like that that really, really, really caught my attention. The Gino Hernandez story that they told uh, last season really caught my attention, as far as I didn't know who he was. I had never heard of him. And was not sure whether I was going to watch that episode or not. I actually ended up DVRing it and watching it probably about a week later, and was fascinated that here was a guy basically living his gimmick. And basically his gimmick was Ric Flair, you know, and he actually really was living it, though, completely, and got into drugs and a drug ring, and they believe was murdered, and again, haven't solved it. No one, has really either admitted to it, or that they haven't really found someone. The family believes it is this person, and they are in jail, but not, for his murder, and just crazy stuff like that. So the Fabulous Moolah, when I was watching wrestling, was an older lady. And I had no clue as a kid the history she had. I didn't know that she was a real wrestler. Did not know that she basically had a wrestling school and trained most of the female wrestlers of that time and in the future. I had no clue. And so all of those were fascinating. Even though they did deal with the darker side, I just liked them telling stories. I think that's one of the things that I like the most about different people's podcasts. Now, I follow podcasts that are doing what I'm doing, starting out, reviewing shows, giving you news and updates and stuff like that. But I like also opinion-based shows and interview shows where people actually tell stories. So I do listen to, Steve Austin's show, listen to Jim Ross's show, Bruce Pritchard's show. I listen to them telling stories. Eric Bischoff's show. I love Conrad Thompson and what he pulls out of things. I have only recently I've listened to one episode of Tony Schiavone's What Happened When with Conrad Thompson, and absolutely loved it, and it will probably take over and go higher up in my listening, because he is actually talking about WCW, which is what I watched. I watched the Southern wrestling when I was younger and was more into those characters, and so that will probably go up higher on my list. Although I love the Jim Ross Report, which is his first podcast. I haven't started grilling JR yet. I've heard it's awesome. Write me which one's your favorite, or if there's something that I'm totally missing, a show that is something I need to hear. So holler at me at that and give me your opinion and advice on that. But the second season of Dark Side of the Ring, I can't help it. I was extremely about. With their first episode dealing with Chris Benoit, I knew that it would be well researched and that they would try to do it without taking a spin on it. So I was really excited about it. And let me tell you why. I started, I guess, following Chris Benoit probably when I was 10 years old. 10 years old, somewhere around there. He was actually the first wrestler that I ever asked my parents to buy me a wrestling shirt of. So I got the Crippler Crossface shirt. I did not know that he had been the Pegasus Kid in New Japan. I have made notes that I need to look that up in YouTube and do some research on that. If you guys have got any videos or any sites that have some matches of his as the Pegasus Kid, please send them to me. I would love to have his matches, or at least see them. Go to a site and see, Chris Benoit versus Eddie Guerrero when they were in New Japan, like Chris Jericho was talking. I was glad that they got Chris Jericho. I was glad that they got Chavo Guerrero. What I wasn't expecting, episode 1, part 1 of the Chris Benoit story was more of not just the Chris Benoit story, but it was a lot of the Eddie Guerrero story. And in the beginning, I was like, wait a minute, I thought that this was Chris Benoit. I had no clue everything that Eddie Guerrero had did. I only knew him from Latino Heat and him flirting with China and all of that. Like I said, I was a kid and I had no clue that he had done so much more before. Definitely did not realize that he and Chris Benoit were so close and such good friends. And I knew that they had left WCW together with Dean Malenko and showed up in WWE, because that's one of the reasons why I switched over to WWE when they went there. I, of course, knew Chris Benoit was probably on steroids. I was going to make the assumption Eddie Guerrero was also on steroids. As I was growing up, I had always read the dirt sheets and stuff like that. I had been on message boards, as I was growing up. So I had heard the rumors that Eddie Guerrero had a drug problem. And so none of that was really a surprise. However, I had no clue about Nancy. None. Again, made a note. Need to look her up. I knew that she was Chris Benoit's wife. I remember hearing something about an angle where Chris Benoit basically stole her and how it became a real life story. Did not know that it was Kevin Sullivan. Had no clue that she was Kevin Sullivan's wife. I did not know that. I definitely need to find those films and watch some of those. I had heard of Woman, but did not remember her whatsoever. Don't really remember a lot about Kevin Sullivan. More remember him as a promoter and a booker, less of a wrestler. I knew he had an injury. Did not realize that Chris Benoit had smacked him in the head and had caused his basically career-ending injury with the concussion ear thing. So all of that was new. So part 1 to me was an intertwining of basically three different people's stories of Eddie Guerrero's story and Nancy's story of her falling in love with wrestling because of her first husband and leaving him and becoming the fallen angel. Had no idea. Then leaving and marrying Kevin Sullivan, becoming woman. Had no clue. And then the Chris Benoit story also intertwined. Absolutely loved part one. Really did. Them portraying Chris Benoit as the gentle giant, as Vicky Guerrero kind of termed him. Giant, I didn't think that she meant for him to be 8 feet tall. I think what she meant, giant, is how muscular and big he was. His broad shoulders is what I think she meant. And how he was the rabid Wolverine, and crazy in the ring. But when he would cut his promos, or you would see him when he was not in a match, or they would have an interview with him in a wrestling magazine or something like that, came across as fairly well-spoken and not savage at all. So part one telling me that he basically saved Nancy from a domestic violence relationship, I was really proud of that. I didn't know that. I was excited about that. To see him become Eddie Guerrero's best friend, and it being told from so many different points of view. From, Dean Malenko's wife, from Vicky Guerrero, from Chavo, from Chris Jericho, and them all talking about how close they were, was really enlightening to me, and I wish we would hear stories of that more. I think a lot of times in this era, there are wrestlers that are really good friends and close. I get the feeling that Sheamus and Cesaro are like that. Even still to this day, even though they're not tag team partners anymore. And I wish more people would talk about that and tell us about, the real people. Part two of the Chris Benoit story took me through a lot of what I had already known. Because like I said, he was one of my favorites. And hearing that his family had died and he had died that night, I was amazed / shocked. I really hadn't been following wrestling. I had a job that I was traveling, I was working longer hours, I was really caught up in, and so I would turn it on every once in a while, but I kind of treated it like a lot of people do soap operas, and it wasn't something that I followed every time it was on. It was like every couple months, flip it over, kind of see what the storylines are, and go away. But I do remember turning wrestling on that night. Kind of wanting to see if it was true. Wanting to see what they would say. And I remember watching that tribute show. And for any of you who have been following these episodes, you know that I mark out for John Cena. So I do remember Cena talking about him. And everything they said that night was stuff that I believed. And I really remember being very upset that night and shocked, and wanted them to catch whoever had did this. And really was upset at his loss. I felt like they did, that he was one of the best wrestlers. And because he was one of my favorites of my childhood, I always kind of gravitate more toward the younger, shorter, smaller wrestlers. I never got into Andre the Giant or Hulk Hogan or the Big Show. I never cheered them on. I did get into Taker and Kane for a little while, but kind of got off Kane. Didn't get into Kane and Daniel Bryan or anything like that. Have never really been into the big huge guys. And I guess that's from childhood, from Chris Benoit. And have always enjoyed the more technical wrestling. Was so excited when Dean Ambrose got hurt, come back, and he showed more of his technical wrestling. Have enjoyed it more in AEW as Jon Moxley, with him actually wrestling. Yes, he brawls and does some hardcore stuff, but he's actually wrestling. I think that's why I am gravitating more towards AEW with their different movesets and the different athleticism, and but they also wrestle like Cody, bringing back the figure four. So then I remember it wasn't the next day after Raw. A couple days later, I saw, I don't even remember what news program, that it had been a murder-suicide. And that Chris Benoit had actually murdered Nancy and his young son. And I think that, to me, shocked me. And I think had I not found that out, I may have went back to wrestling then. What was it, 2007? I think I would have picked it up. But I think that kind of turned me off. They were blaming it then on steroids. And so I think, pretty much knowing he had been on steroids, not enjoying the juiced up baseball stuff, knowing like Hulk Hogan had been on steroids and all of that, I guess I just kind of didn't go back to it. Like I said, until here recently. So I had been following it on the periphery. So I also knew that they had tested his brain for CTE, and that it was found that he had an 85-year-old man's brain, basically, and that he had some holes and deterioration, and that there was a real possibility that he either had dementia or was getting dementia. And so I had heard that part. I did not know that he had kept journals. I did not know that people had recommended him to write to Eddie. I did not, like I said, I didn't even know that him and Eddie were best friends, so didn't realize that that may have played a part in him snapping. So I had no idea that he had any kind of mental health issues or anything like that. So that was a surprise. Him dealing with his grief and no one really getting him help for it. Or him, I mean, maybe they tried and he refused. I don't know. Just so heartbreaking to hear this happen and everything that went along with it, but was so fascinated about this documentary. I feel like it was really well done. I like that they only got people who knew him. I like how they had Nancy's sister. They had David Benoit, his oldest son. They had his friends, there. I like how JR on the tribute talked about how close he was with Chris Benoit. And from listening to him on the Ross Report, which, like I said, was his very first podcast that he did, I found it on Castbox. I usually listen to Pocket Cast. It wasn't on there. And so I found it on Castbox and have been listening to it on and off. I know JR's feelings. He has made those clear. And this podcast is from, I guess, 2014, 2015, 2016. So JR makes no bones about how he feels now and that he believes he's a murderer and should not be in the Hall of Fame and all of that, which led me to think, and I've thought, the last several days, should Chris Benoit be in the Hall of Fame? And as far as I know, there's no qualifications for the Hall of Fame. It's basically whoever Vince McMahon wants in it and thinks will bring a crowd. I guess if he's looking for publicity one day, then he'll put him in. If there was a Hall of Fame like there are for other sports, baseball, basketball, football, whatever, I think you have to put Chris Benoit in there. I think of his era, being in New Japan, being, in different territories, being in WCW, being in WWE, I think you have to put him in there. He was a star everywhere he went. He was looked up to everywhere he went. So if you're doing a wrestling Hall of Fame, I think he has to be there. I think you have to mention him. Is he going to be in a person Hall of Fame? No, he's a murderer. They've proven that. He murdered his son Daniel and was in the house with him for 2 days and never called anybody. Had to be out of his mind. Had to be. But I think if there was a physical Hall of Fame with different areas, different wings, I think somewhere in that building you have to mention Chris Benoit. I absolutely hate that the WWE doesn't want to say his name. Has basically erased him. Has, taken a lot of his matches off the WWE network. Has blanked out his name, on different things. I hate that. I really do. I hate that they control the library of a lot of different promotions in different territories, and they have chosen to do that. I hope whoever takes over the company after Vince McMahon, that maybe 20 years down the line, 40 years down the line, that they will reinstitute that and put those back in the vault so that people can enjoy him for a wrestler. But, that doesn't change the act he did. And I know that some of you are sitting there listening to me and saying, how on earth can Sam say that? Well, I think it has a lot to do with a job that I used to do and for 13 years, and how I had to look at people and realize that sometimes the acts that they did were against the law or were evil or were abusive or whatever, but that didn't change the person they were. It didn't necessarily mean that they were awful because they did this or they were on drugs. That didn't necessarily mean they were a bad person inside. So I think that's the reason why I look at it the way I did. This week's subject on Dark Side of the Ring is going to be New Jack. I'm going to be honest with you. I have no clue who that is. I have no clue what the episode's about. It just says, New Jack. And I don't want to research it. I want to let Dark Side of the Ring tell me the story they want to tell me, and then I want to research it. So you guys will probably get something this coming week on what I think of it. I am interested in their upcoming episodes, especially I was looking forward to Chris Benoit, but the second one that I am definitely looking forward to is the one on the Road Warriors. I want to know, they were also childhood fan favorites of mine, and so I can't wait to hear their story being told. I watched, I believe it was Hawks kid, play linebacker for Ohio State, James Laurinaitis, and followed him. So I am interested in the story they have to tell. And then, of course, I am looking forward to the Owen Hart story, because Dark Side of the Ring is not WWE affiliated. So I'm hoping that we will get an open and possibly deeper and better look into that story. So really looking forward to those three. But I'm looking forward to the whole season. Next topic I want to bring up is the Taz YouTube show after AEW this past week on March 25th. I enjoyed it. Now, I watched it after the fact. I did not watch it live because I was actually attending a virtual basketball online clinic. I was watching a clinic and I had missed the first part of AEW Dynamite. So I had to watch it on my DVR. So therefore, it put me behind, and I didn't get to watch Taz when he was live. Obviously, he was having some buffering problems or something like that. But when I watched it on YouTube later after the fact, there are no buffering problems or anything. You can watch it right now. Thought that it was typical Taz. I've listened to his podcast before. Wish he was a little more prepared to really talk about each match. He was kind of doing a lot of it from memory. I don't even know if he knew that he was planning on really doing that. I think he was overwhelmed with the amount of viewers that he got. I think the questions were coming fast, and instead of kind of doing an after show and going over the show and his thoughts and his views on different subjects and everything, I think he wanted to do more of a Taz Town Hall type episode and answer questions. And they were going by so fast that I don't know that he necessarily got to answer too many of them. I wish he had some help. I know with the pandemic he can't, have someone in there reading him questions or anything like that. But I'm looking forward to if they continue doing that, and as it gets better and better, because we all know Taz is a perfectionist, and he is definitely going to get better at it. I love how I think AEW is being more reactive than WWE. At least AEW is not afraid to mention that the coronavirus pandemic exists. Last week their show, they had the heels and the baby faces, and they had them on opposite sides of the ring, and it was more lighthearted. They were gambling, it was more fun oriented. They knew they were going to have a good show because they were revealing the Exalted One. They knew they were revealing Matt Hardy and everything. This week was more serious, more about progressing storylines, about showing matches, about getting the storylines moving and not stale, and not showing taped coverages and stuff like that. So I think they're actually reacting better to this whole thing than the WWE is. Their commentary is so much better. WWE doesn't have a true commentator that can talk about the match and describe the moves and what the moves do in real life, how they hurt, how they sell injuries. Cody brought this week older wrestlers and compared them to newer wrestlers and talked about why he thought that and drew comparisons. And they don't do that in WWE. They don't tell you who Cesaro's like. They don't tell you who Dolph Ziggler is like, or how they're different, how they're making their own path, or anything like that. WWE, for them, their moniker to be then, now, and forever. They don't really celebrate their past. They bring legends back. They bring Stone Cold back. They bring The Undertaker back. But they don't go into their history. They don't. For newer viewers or younger viewers, they don't paint pictures for them. And I think that is really showing with no fans. And they're not talking about the moves. They're talking kind of storyline stuff. And when you listen to WWE, sometimes they're talking about a completely different storyline than the match that's happening in the ring has to do with. To me, it feels like Blood and Guts from AEW probably needs to take place in the fall. I know from reading Twitter and the wrestling community and the wrestling universe, you guys want it to happen in June or July, and you're wanting to have it up in Rochester, New York, whenever they have rescheduled that. For some reason, I'm going to say it's July 22nd, but I'm not 100%, so don't hold me to that. I don't know. I think that's going to be too soon. I don't see this pandemic scare being over. And I think it's going to be June before the pandemic scare is really over. So I think July is going to be too early for people to forget about it. The match itself is named Blood and Guts. It's going to have 2 rings, a steel cage. There's going to be blood. AEW is wanting to put on a show and a half. And I'm excited about it. But I think in order to get the pandemic out of people's mind and them to accept the blood part of it, I think it's going to have to wait till fall. And I know that a lot of you are going to be going and throwing things at me right now and hitting your phone and all that other stuff that you're listening to this on. But I think it's going to be the fall. So if you disagree with me, yeah, you definitely need to hit me up. Tell me a month that you think it's going to happen in. And I mean, maybe I'll put up a poll or something like that. Hit me up on Wrestling Overtime Twitter or Facebook page or wrestlingovertime@gmail.com. Let me know when you think that's going to happen. Today, Saturday, I absolutely loved Jericho's drink and sing along video. It was absolutely hilarious. You guys really need to watch that. I hear a lot of people griping in the wrestling community about WrestleMania needs to be postponed. I hear that some of the wrestlers are saying it should have been postponed. Well, had WWE been on the ball and really saw and knew this was coming in February or March and made a move then, I think they could have postponed it. I really do. We knew about this virus in December, January. You know, I believe they're saying the president got briefed on it like the first or second week of January. So WWE by February kind of knew. They knew definitely in March. So for them to continue storylines and not be prepared for this really disappoints me. I think it definitely could have been postponed then. Now, can it be postponed? No. Vince McMahon waited until 2 weeks away, 2.5 weeks away. No, it couldn't be postponed at that late point. It has been a disaster for indie shows to try to cancel things. We have all heard about the problems WrestleCon has had. So I cannot imagine trying to repostpone that. And everybody trying to get hotels and trying to maneuver the amount of people that is there during WrestleMania week. That's what you guys have got to realize. It is a week of wrestling taking over a city, a huge city, an awful lot of hotels that not only is WWE there, indie promotions are there, having their own matches. WrestleCon is there. People like Bruce Pritchard are having events where they're telling stories and stuff. Conrad Thompson is there with different people, interviewing things. There are things going on every night. Joey Janela's beach party was supposed to be being going on. Different people are having parties and matches and events, and the comedy clubs are full of different wrestlers, Colt Cabana and Dolph Ziggler doing comedy shows and all of that. And then if they would have postponed it, they had to make sure that they could do the Hall of Fame and NXT TakeOver. And were they not going to do that? Were they just going to do WrestleMania? Was WrestleMania still going to be 2 nights? And then by waiting to the last minute, they couldn't have canceled it because, number one, no one knows when this is going to be over. But once it's announced that it's over, everybody's going to be scrambling to reschedule stuff. You know, you're going to have, they're talking about playing NBA basketball in the summer and shortening the season. Major League Baseball, starting later, shortening the season. Concerts, tours, getting moved. They're going to have to reschedule. All of that is going to resume. Rodeos, monster trucks, all that stuff that comes are going to be taking over places and trying to scramble to get it. So even if Vince McMahon decides, I don't know, let's have it in Pittsburgh in October, who's to say that whatever city, if he picks Pittsburgh, has all the different conventions and comedy clubs and meeting space, and that could have WrestleCon, that could have the Hall of Fame, that could have, TakeOver, that could, is there enough hotels? Is there enough restaurants? Or is the Steelers going to be playing then along with the Penguins and along with the Pirates, and then concerts coming in and being booked? That's one of the reasons why WrestleMania is booked a year and a half in advance, is because it's just so massive. Wanted to let you guys know, and this isn't a spoiler, but WWE has about a week and a half in the can. They have already taped March 30th Raw, April the 3rd SmackDown, which is this coming week. They've taped 2 nights of WrestleMania, and then they've taped the Raw after WrestleMania, which is April 6th. It is that WrestleMania weekend, they are going to start making decisions, starting with the SmackDown that would be April 10th, about whether they're going to go back live, whether they're going to tape, or whether they're going to show old pay-per-views. So maybe we get some stories being told then. Maybe they do like their own kind of Dark Side of the Ring. I don't know. But they have already taped basically about a week and a half of stuff. And it's already in the can. It's ready to go. So you guys have got WWE wrestling coming up. The next non-spoiler is Monday Night Raw has advertised this coming Monday night. It's going to be Brock Lesnar, it's going to be The Undertaker, and Becky Lynch. They didn't advertise just those 3 people. So we'll see what we get. Now, I'm looking at my time, and I'm about 52 minutes. I wasn't expected to take that long on talking about Chris Benoit. Sorry about that if I bored any of you guys. So what I will do is I'm going to end this podcast episode right now, and I'm going to do a separate spoilers WrestleMania episode so that you guys don't have to turn it off. You actually have listened to it all. And again, I just want to repeat, you can hit me up on Wrestling Overtime's Facebook page, Twitter page, or you can hit me up at wrestlingovertime@gmail.com. Like I said, I'm going to do right after this, I am going to record a spoilers podcast that is going to include WrestleMania. It's not going to include any WrestleMania results. It's just going to talk about the changes that have been made. So if you guys want to listen to that, you sure can. And I will talk to you guys hopefully soon. Like I said, hit me up and leave a review at podchaser.com and let me know what you guys are thinking. I'll talk to you soon.